This right here is my Xtool P2. I've had it for a little bit over 2 months now, and in that time I've tested it out. I've actually taken the machine apart and drilled holes in the casing even in order to solve a problem I've had with it. And I've also built about $600 of customer orders with this machine. And even though I started out genuinely wanting to like the P2, it's honestly caused me a lot of headaches, and now I'm considering replacing it with a different laser. So in this video, I'll cover 3 main things. Number 1 is the 4 biggest problems that I've personally had with the P2. Number 2, I'll highlight some of the things I've actually liked about this machine. And for number 3, I'll share my perspective on who I think should still at least consider buying a P2. And in this section, I'll also talk a little bit about which of the 4 problems that I've had may have been improved or even solved entirely by some of the upgrades in the new P2S version of the laser that was recently released by Xtool. And by the way, Xtool sent me this unit for free to review. And with that all said, let's jump into problem number 1. Despite being advertised as Lightburn compatible, the P2 actually doesn't play very nicely with the Lightburn software. And if you go on the Lightburn forum, you'll quickly find several different threads of P2 users who have had this sort of problem. So I'm not the only one that has run into it. And this is a big deal for a lot of laser users who do want to use Lightburn, because if you're not using Xtool's own creative space software and instead choose to use Lightburn, you're probably going to run into a few issues. Specifically, here are the 3 biggest Lightburn compatibility issues I've encountered with the P2. Number 1, the camera doesn't work with Lightburn. Inside of the creative space software, it works great, but if you move to Lightburn, then it doesn't work at all, which is a pretty big deal by itself. But to make matters worse, there also is no built-in framing laser inside the P2, which means aligning materials on your workbed, if you choose to use Lightburn, a little bit of a guessing game. The autofocus feature also doesn't work with Lightburn, and so to set your focus, you have to go through the tedious process of measuring the distance between your material and your laser head. You then take that measurement and use this equation to get a new number. Then you punch that number onto the end of this bunch of characters into the G-code section of the P2's device settings in Lightburn. And if you swap to a thicker material later, guess what? You're doing all those steps again. But to be fair to Xtool, they do call out these first 2 Lightburn issues in the FAQs section on the P2 sales page, but let's face it, most people never make it that far down the page, and I personally haven't seen anybody else on YouTube talking about these problems, and so I thought they were still worth mentioning. And the 3rd compatibility issue is the laser getting paused or disconnected from Lightburn entirely. I've seen a couple of Lightburn forum threads about this issue, and I think I might have actually run into it myself once or twice, but it hasn't been a huge problem for me. And I also put it last in this list because there's a chance that I actually caused any connection issues myself due to some modifications that I made to the laser that we'll talk about more later. Problem number 2 is the built-in exhaust fan. Now, if you are doing occasional low smoke engravings, then this built-in fan might work okay for you. But if you're doing any type of cutting at all, then I don't think this fan is nearly powerful enough. The good news here is that it's pretty easy to upgrade. You can remove the built-in fan pretty easily, and then you can connect your ducting to a much more powerful inline fan like this one. But the next problem, which also required an upgrade, was much trickier to solve. And I think the best way to illustrate this problem is by showing you this cut test that I ran on the P2 shortly after getting the machine. This is cut out of a 1/4-inch walnut plywood, which is a material I use pretty frequently in my laser business. And if you look closely, you'll notice that it actually cut out pretty easily all of the different sample speed and power intersections that I tested in this test grid. However, if you look closely, you'll notice that all of these samples, every single one, does have these pesky scorch marks here. And the reason that it has it on all the samples and there weren't any magical combination of power and speed that would eliminate them is because the built-in air compressor or the built-in air assist pump inside the P2 is simply not powerful enough to eliminate these scorch marks. When I first discovered this problem, I checked to see if there was any straightforward way to pipe in an external air compressor, which is a feature you do see in some higher-end lasers like the Aeon Mira 5. And even though it looks like there's an air hose intake on the back of the P2, this is actually for their fire suppression accessory and is not connected to the air assist at all. So then I decided to take matters in my own hands, and I began to take the P2 apart. Don't try this at home. I had to take off a lot of the external paneling and even undo some wiring in order to access the air assist pump that you see here. Once I did access the pump, I was able to drill some holes in the side and then run a line out from the old air assist pump and a new line in from my external air compressor. Doing that allowed me to ramp up the air pressure, and I got the best results running at 30 to 35 PSI, which I could really feel coming out here. And this allowed me to get really clean cuts like you see here on the sample project, which was not sanded at all, proving that the underlying issue was in fact the power of the air assist, just like we thought. And problem number 4 is that I've already ruined 2 focal lenses in about 2 months. Now I want to be clear about this one. The first lens lens was 100% entirely my fault. I ran the laser on and off for a few weeks without cleaning the mirrors or the lens a single time. And only later did I find out that Xtool actually recommends that you clean the mirrors and the lens about every 2 to 4 hours of use. So that one's clearly on me. I went way over that recommended time and I ruined a lens because I got residue on it that I just couldn't get off. So lesson learned, I paid $60 or so for a replacement lens and put that into my laser. But then with the second lens, I was bound and determined to be a good operator, and I took it out for cleaning after about 3 to 4 hours of use, so still within the recommended time window. And I cleaned off it. It was pretty clean, but the lens had a little bit of residue on it. I just cleaned it right off, only to discover that the lens was cracked. And again, I want to be as fair as possible about this, and I don't think that the second lens cracked because of lack of cleaning. However, remember that I did also modify the air assist, and so now the lens is in close proximity to an airstream of air that is much more powerful than what would have been coming through with the built-in air compressor. So there's a chance that that could have contributed or maybe even caused entirely the crack in the lens. At the end of the day, I don't know for sure what caused the crack in the second lens, so it's entirely possible that problem number 4 was actually completely my fault. But I still wanted to share this experience with you just because it's been part of my personal frustrations that I've had with the machine. Okay, now that we've covered my biggest gripes, I think it's also important to point out that no machine is perfect, and the Xtool P2 does have some good things going for it. So I'll give you 3 examples, the first 2 of which are big quality of life improvements compared to something like an open frame diode laser like I have with my D1 Pro over here. Number 1 is the built-in camera system, and this works really great for positioning materials when you are using the Xtool Creative Space software. Number 2 is the autofocus, which is another convenience thing that also works pretty well when you're using the Creative Space software. Number 3 is a big one, and that is speed. I was able to run this machine and get good clean cuts on 1/4-inch plywood running at about 12 millimeters per second, which is about twice the speed that I'm able to use on the same material running a 40-watt diode laser. So this could be a pretty big deal if you are a side hustler or somebody that's running a small business and using this type of machine. It's a lot faster than something like my Xtool D1 Pro. And there are other positives as well. I just wanted to share a few examples to hopefully balance out some of my earlier gripes and to share hopefully a more nuanced perspective on the P2 overall. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about who should still at least consider buying a P2. But before we get into some general takeaways, I think it's worth spending a little bit of time talking about the new updated P2S version of the laser. Up to this point in the video, I've been talking specifically about this P2 because that's the model I have here in my shop. However, you may have noticed that Xtool recently released an upgraded version of this called the P2S. And so I wanted to point out a couple of things specific to the P2S that might actually help with some of the problems that I talked about earlier in the video. First, and probably most importantly, the P2S has an upgraded air assist pump, which has been one of my biggest complaints with the P2. And just to give you some specifics so that you can see how much of a change it is, the original P2 that I have here has an air assist pump that runs at about 22 PSI, whereas the new upgraded dual pump runs at about 29 PSI. However, it's also important to point out that the current pump that I have in the P2 is a single pump and it actually pulses. So if I hold my finger up to the feed of the air pump, I can actually feel it going like ta, 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 pulsing like that. And according to the information I've seen from Xtool, the new dual pump should make a more steady stream of air, which actually makes it more similar to the air compressor setup that I use here to fix the problem. And without having the P2S here in my shop, I have no way of knowing exactly how much difference it makes from the base model to the new P2S, but it has been upgraded, so it's possible that it solved or at least improved to some extent the scorching I was getting with this base model. The other upgrade they've made to the P2S that's relevant to the problems we talked about in this video is that they've upgraded the exhaust fan. The original exhaust fan in this base model is rated at about 145 CFM. And the new upgraded version in the P2S is rated at about 233 CFM. So it is a more powerful exhaust fan. And again, without having the P2S here in my shop, I can't really compare to see exactly how much difference this upgrade makes. And just to give you a little bit of a reference point when thinking about these CFM numbers, you might find it helpful to know that the Thunder Nova 24, which is a little bit bigger than the Xtool P2, it ships with a 375 CFM exhaust fan. And if you want to know what I personally do in my shop, I have my ducting, which does go to multiple lasers, hooked up to a fan that pulls over 800 CFM. And even though I have multiple fans hooked up to it, it still might be a little bit overkill. And so this just gives you a little bit of idea of the range of CFMs that we're working with here. And now that we've talked about some of the improvements with the P2S, let me see if I can get into some general takeaways for people who are considering buying a P2. If you've seen some of my other videos, then you might know that my default recommendation for beginners is actually to start with something like an enclosed diode laser, for example, something like the Xtool S1 or the Raleigh Lasermatic MK2. But everyone has their own unique situation, so of course this default recommendation isn't gonna work for everybody. So for example, if you wanna do a lot of transparent or translucent materials like glass and acrylic, then something like a P2, which is a desktop CO2 laser, might actually work out a lot better for you. Or on the other hand, if you just find yourself wanting more speed or features than you get with your typical diode laser setup, but you don't want to go all the way up in price to get something like a Thunder or an Aeon laser, then the Xtool P2 and P2S kind of sits in the middle there. It might actually still be a good option for you to consider. So now for the million-dollar question, and that's whether or not I would personally pay full price of $4,000 or whatever the current price of the P2 is in order to buy this laser and use it in my laser shop. The short answer to that is no. And a big reason for that is because I cut a lot of 1/4-inch plywood material in my shop. And when I cut it, I want it to come out with super, super clean cuts. No scorching of any kind, or at least minimize the scorching so that I can have the least amount of sanding and post-production possible, because a lot of times I'm cutting these for customers, and the less time that I can spend making these, the higher my hourly rate. And that's why I'm currently shopping around looking at some more expensive CO2 laser options. But hey, that's just my 2 cents and my own personal situation here. And so if you are watching this video and you happen to have a P2 and you love it, or if you just have a specific experience you want to share about it, then feel free to leave that in the comments below for everybody else to see. And if you made it this far in the video and you feel like you need more information about the various options on the laser market, then you might be interested in this video right here, which is my beginner's guide to choosing your first laser engraver. And so click or tap on that if you want to check it out, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Bye now.